All right, so here we are again for our weekly Wednesday meeting, and we've got Chris Lacy, who is a home inspector here in Northeast Ohio, on the call with us, and we're going to feature him through our interview today and just kind of ask him some questions and challenges that he faces with home inspections for multifamily as well as single family. Chris, my first question for you is give us a real story of something that you found in a home inspection that you never expected you'd come across? I know you got to have a bunch of them.
Uh, yeah, I mean, there's definitely things that I've come across that I wasn't looking for or hoping for. Most frequently, it's honestly dead animals.
Ooh.
I've come across animals in basements and attics. Thankfully, no live animals.
Better animals than people.
Yeah, yeah, people are animals. Uh, there's definitely those aspects that you know tend to scare people away, but they're all treatable. They're all things that can be removed and taken care of.
So give us an
Usually,
example of we're talking about dead animals. You come across that. Give us an example of some stuff that you find in attics or in crawl spaces and things like that, and what people
uh,
could do to prevent them getting in there in the first place.
right. That's the key. So the biggest thing to prevent animals from getting into your attic are honestly keeping trees away from the house. Trees are a big thing, whether it's foundation issues or issues coming into the attic. Trees give those animals access to the home. They climb up in the tree, and the squirrels, they can jump pretty far, so they're able to get in there. I was actually just looking at a picture of an attic that had, it was a 2x6 that had a big C cut out of it, so a squirrel or something was up there just nibbling on it like a sandwich. It was just hanging out. So it got in there through, through the soffit or a hole in the siding there. It was able to just get in and make a nest in there.
Okay. How about bats? Do you ever run into bats?
I've never ran into any
Okay.
bats.
All right. Interesting. I've heard that a few times where people have had bat
Yeah,
droppings and stuff
they
in
can
their
get into even
ceilings and
smaller areas.
right, and then as they hang in the attic space, their droppings end up in the insulation. When it gets heavy, it starts making
Yep,
a
they'll
wet
start
mark on
pushing,
the
start pushing
ceiling.
through.
Yeah, it can be a real nightmare if you get into something like that.
Yeah, so
So,
anytime you see a moisture stain, anything like that, it could just be as simple as a storm, a heavy storm blew some water in and caused a little spot, or some caulking on a window was failed and water traveled down through the window and across the floor. You can see that on a first floor, coming from an upstairs second bedroom window. But especially if you're on that second floor looking at the attic area, you want to make sure that there isn't any animal presence in that area.
okay. So if I'm an investor, especially an out-of-state investor that's not local here, and they're depending on you and I to go out and I let you in and you do the inspection and stuff, what are some of the things leading up to the actual inspection that they got to ensure is in place?
For the investor buying the house,
Yep.
well, they need to make sure that if they're able to come to it, that is key, so that they can get that first, you know, upfront personal look at the property. If not, good communication as to what they expect from myself or from the inspector, on pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, so taking a lot of pictures throughout the house, just overview photos. If that's something you want, like how many you want 4 pictures in each room, you want 10 pictures in each room, you want, what do you want to see, other than just the defects of the property?
Okay. And how challenging is it when you have multiple units to coordinate that inspection from a utility standpoint, from an access standpoint? What does that conversation look like for you when that investor calls you for the first time?
Um, I guess for me, it's me just waiting on them to tell me what they want. I'm here to do a full general inspection on the property and give you a rundown of what's deficient in it. If there's other things that you'd like me to do, I'm willing to do that as far as taking pictures and going through and helping you see that from my point of view, since you can't be there. So just let us know. As far as attic access and making sure utilities are on, that's something that should be standard, but definitely, checking with that listing agent to make sure that those things are done. As we know, early in August, we had two duplexes that we inspected, and one of the units was out of gas. It didn't have gas turned on to the house, so I wasn't able to look at the furnace. I wasn't able to check the water heater, to make sure that those items are working. The stove was gas, so I couldn't check the operation of the stove. Little things like that that end up being, somewhat big. If you're not able to check it, then there's a second visit that has to happen to make sure that everything's functioning properly.
And if there is a second visit, obviously your time is valuable. You've got to charge a trip charge to come back out if those utilities weren't on, correct?
I do. So, I have to go back out and, spend, maybe only half an hour on site, but that takes out time that I could be doing another inspection or something else with the family. And you're right, time is money, and I do charge a re-inspection fee.
Okay, so let's talk about when they do call and the types of inspections that you offer. What's that smorgasbord look like of the inspections that you're able to do for people?
Okay, so first off, obviously the general home inspection that goes through the house, the interior, the exterior, roof, foundation, electric, plumbing. But also if there's any possibility of mold, anything that you want to look into further and sample and find out what kind of mold it is, anything like that. I can do air samples and lift tape samples, find out what the air quality is, if there is any, bad mold in the house. The biggest thing that I do is radon as a secondary inspection, radon gas, setting those monitors. I use continuous radon monitors, so you have, every hour data of where that level is, instead of with charcoal, you get one result at the end. Wood destroying insects, that is another big one. Wood destroying insect inspections here in Ohio, termites, carpenter bees, carpenter ants, powder post beetles. So we're checking for those. And then
do you do well in septic?
I do not do the well and septic inspections. Haven't gotten into that.
Okay, so if a well is present or a septic is present, most of the time on investment properties they're not there. But I have come across a few in the past. Is that something that you can help to coordinate, or is that a separate call that the investor needs to be looking for a different
no, I have no problem coordinating septic and well inspections with my general home inspection. As long as the client is comfortable with me taking care of that, they're not really concerned of who's doing it. I have a couple people that I can go to and call and schedule those to come out at the same time.
Okay. All right. So let me open this to the rest of the group. I've got more questions, but I don't want to do all the talking. Does anybody else have any questions they want to throw out to Chris from an inspection standpoint?
Yeah. Hey, Chris. A lot of investors are looking at Cleveland because they're out of state, and like Cleveland is a city that's familiar to those that aren't from here locally. But one thing that has come up with Cleveland is, lead-based paint. Is that an inspection that you're able to do to provide any guidance or insight to what they may be dealing with there?
Corey, unfortunately, I'm not licensed in lead-based paint. There's a extensive class that you have to take and keep up on recertifying on that continually, and I haven't gotten into it.
So
I haven't had anybody in my 5 years of inspecting here. I haven't had anybody even ask about lead-based paint and testing for it.
Yeah, normally under a normal fire situation, it's not asked for, but because of the Cleveland ordinance, it has to be done now every 2 years for investment properties.
Okay.
Okay, so that could be an interesting topic for a future video, is maybe we invite somebody that does lead-based paint inspections and use that as a topic because I think that would be very useful for that from that perspective. Anybody else have any questions
Yeah,
for Chris?
definitely.
True story in question. I had a home inspector start crying during the inspection. One, how should I handle that? And two, should we not buy the house?
Well, Frank, it depends on what they were crying for. Was it something that you did, or was it the house that caused them to cry?
It's a good question.
So when we get an investor coming through, is there a certain number of units that you cap out at? You know, if it's a 12 unit property, I know from a time perspective you can only do so much in a day, but is there a certain size of building or a certain number of units that you say, okay, I can't do that, but here's what I would recommend you do?
Or a certain type of mechanicals based on those bigger buildings.
Yeah, so I have brought in HVAC technicians with me on properties. So, for instance, like a larger boiler system, I would bring in a HVAC technician to look at. 3-phase electrical systems, I bring in an electrician to inspect with me, and I take care of paying that, you know, to the professional that's coming out with me, and we go from there. So I get their professional opinion on some of these larger systems. But as far as a unit go, you know, a 6-unit building, 12-unit building, I have more than capable of doing those. It's just the time factor. Sometimes they'd have to be broken up into 2 separate visits, depending on the size.
Plus,
or I could hire a second inspector. You know, I have other inspector friends that I could hire to come out with me, and we could do it together and get everything done in one day.
Hey, Chris, I have a question for you, and it pertains to roofs.
Okay.
Seems like I run into it a lot where there seems to be a determination as to whether the roof, you know, is any good or not, or, you know, how much life it has left in it. Can you kind of expand on how you look at that stuff and how you make a determination?
Okay. So the way I do it, I don't say whether or not it has 5 years or 10 years, because you really don't know. Even a roofer, a professional roofer that's with them every day, they could tell you it's going to last 5 years, and it might leak in 2. So being able to say on a certain time period of this roof is going to last you this long, anybody that does it is honestly, in my opinion, guessing. And I don't like to put guesswork into anything that I do. I want to know, and it's a fact. So I look at granule loss. That's the big thing. I look at the shingle overall and try to determine, you know, what type of loss that shingle has in overall granules. I'm looking for patchy areas. I'm looking for dents and divots, you know, from hail damage, things like that, to give you a overall, is it in good shape? Is it in mediocre shape? Does it need to be replaced soon? You know, so that way, for budgeting purposes, if it's deteriorating, you know, you have, you know, a year to 3 years maybe at most to get that taken care of, you know, to avoid leaks.
What about slate roofs? We're coming across that quite a bit.
There are quite a few slate roofs, and they last over 100 years, 150 years. Slate roofs are very good as far as that goes, but they are becoming more fragile as the time goes on, so that they take damage very easily. Slate roofs are something that I don't get up on. I can't get up on. You're not able to walk on them because you will break them and crumble them. So you have to get a bucket to get up there. The roofing companies that do repairs on them generally do that with a lift of some sort to be able to get into it. And so they're harder to see defects, and they're harder to find places that need to be repaired from the top. But I typically spend a lot more time in the attic space when there's a slate roof. That way I'm looking at the underside of the decking to make sure that I can see any water staining areas, anything that would show that there is an issue that needs to be addressed on the roof.
Okay. Anybody else have additional questions? Okay, so
We're not, we're not home inspect. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. I didn't hear you the first time.
I was just gonna say, obviously we're not home inspectors, but what are some things that you would recommend that we look for, like when walking through a house for a first time with an investor, and showing them? Is there anything that you can recommend, like just to keep an eye out for as red flags before having to call you in, perhaps to keep them on their search?
I mean, definitely foundation is key. So look at the foundation, make sure that, downspout lines are pushed away from the house from the outside, keeping that water away. Water intrusion is the biggest issue with foundations, whether it's just seeping through and causing moisture in the basement that can damage, if it's a finished area or a nicer basement. And then the foundation walls themselves, making sure that they're straight still. There's a lot of water issues that are pushing foundations in, and you start to see that horizontal cracking from the hydrostatic pressure. So just looking at those foundations and making sure that the walls are in good shape. Because I've gone into a couple and I've pretty much called the inspection, told them that, hey, you got a major issue here with the foundation. Did you know that? And they're like, no, I didn't know there was anything going on with it. So that first look from the realtor going into the house, if you're able to go into it beforehand, then yeah, check that out and make sure that we're not all wasting time by having a horrible foundation before we get started.
Yeah.
And whenever we show houses, the first thing you should be doing is we're going to go in the basement first.
Yeah.
The house
Don't fall in love. Don't fall in love with the house before you look at the basement.
Oh, it's
Chris,
a shame.
what all counties do you cover? And is there a price difference based on square footage on a single family home, or is it all the same? How does that work?
Okay, so as far as the area that I go, I pretty much travel. I've traveled everywhere that anybody has asked me to in Northeast Ohio. Anywhere around an hour driving time is where I go. So from North Canton, I can go all the way up to Willoughby and that area on the east side, the east side. And over the west side, I've gone to Oberlin, Olmsted Township, Olmsted Falls, and even in the southern side of Northeast Ohio, go down to a little past Tuscarawas County.
Yeah, I think you did Vermilion for me at one time.
Yeah, I did a Vermilion location as well. Yeah, that's a little further out there, isn't it? But as far as pricing goes, my base price right now is $350, and that covers up to a 2,500 square foot property. With duplexes, multifamily, triplex, quadplex, I add $150 per additional unit. That can, cover all the extra furnace and air conditioners, all the extra bathrooms and different things, kitchen sinks, all the other appliances, stoves, refrigerators, dishwashers, everything that takes more time and reporting to do. So that's really what I do. So it's all square footage. Nothing changes for the age of the home, even though an older house definitely has more reporting and more time put into it. I don't charge based on age.
What seems to be the biggest deficiencies when it comes to electrical? And then follow up to that question would be also, what is the biggest deficiencies with plumbing that you see?
Okay, so with electrical, I'd say wiring and in general is the issue, whether it's a knob and tube wiring in the older homes that aren't grounded. Grounding, we know, needs to happen now for safety. So these older homes, a lot of them don't have updated wiring, or if they do, they have an updated panel with brand new Romex wiring in it, and then 20 feet down the basement wall or the basement ceiling, you have junction boxes running into the knob and tube wiring. So at first look, you have a nice brand new updated wiring and it looks great. But when you go around the house and there's 3-prong outlets that don't have a ground, they've changed out the outlets and they've changed out the breakers, but none of the wiring was changed. So that I run into probably 80% of the time in these older homes. And that's key for keeping people safe. They need to know what they're getting into.
Well, what about
the investor?
plumbing?
You want to know what you're getting into, whether you need to rewire the whole house or just certain things.
What about plumbing? What's that major issue that you just see happen over and over again?
I'd say the biggest thing with plumbing in the older homes is galvanized piping. Whether it's used for water or gas, the galvanized piping tends to rust from the inside, and then it restricts the flow of the water to the faucet. It restricts the water draining. So you can have a sink that just sits there and holds the water for a little bit of time. But I'd say galvanized piping would be the biggest plumbing issue, and then S-traps. So an S-trap under the sink is where you have the P that holds the water that keeps the sewer gas from coming out, and then it immediately goes up and down. When it comes down straight to the floor, through the floor, it tends to siphon out that water from the trap, and then it can allow sewer gas to come back up through. So I'd say the galvanized piping and then just the traps under the sinks are the biggest thing that I report on.
Okay, so when an investor or home buyer calls you for the first time, sometimes the perception is, I'm hiring this home inspector and they think they're checking everything about that house. They think you have an X-ray vision camera that's going to see everything that could possibly go wrong. What expectations do you set for what it is that you're inspecting on these units?
Well, personally and verbally on the conversation, nothing. I don't tell them anything other than, if they ask what I'm doing as far as the general inspection, I let them know that I check the electrical, the plumbing, as many outlets as I can get to, as many windows that I can operate. I go through and run all the faucets, flush all the toilets, make sure that the fixtures are all operating, HVAC, run heat, run cooling. But then in my agreement, that's the biggest thing. In the agreement, it explains what my standards of practice are.
Okay.
And it tells you everything that I inspect, everything that I don't inspect. Because there's certain things like fireplaces, interiors of the flue, of the chimney aren't inspected, and that requires you to get another type of inspection from a chimney professional to come out and look at things like that.
You're not moving furniture, you're not removing drywall to inspect.
If there's stuff piled in a corner, you usually get a picture of stuff piled in the corner, and limited inspection due to the belongings or cluttered conditions. We're not supposed to touch personal items in anybody's home.
That's it.
So if there's a bunch of stuff there, I'm sorry, I can't inspect it. I will look around it, try to peek over things, but touching and moving an occupant's belongings opens me up to litigation of damaging their stuff.
Right. Okay. Anybody else have any further questions of Chris?
But Blaise, to add on to that a little bit, knowing that you're, as an investor, you're going to purchase a home that is tenant occupied, it would be a good idea for you to ask that, the listing agent, to make sure that the tenants or the owner, whoever you're talking to make sure that that tenant knows what to expect as far as the home inspection goes, and to be able to have that stuff readily accessible. I couldn't tell you how many times that an electric panel was blocked by storage boxes. Usually there's somebody there and I'm able to say, hey, can you move your stuff for me so that I can get into it? But there's been 2 or 3 times that there wasn't, a possibility of moving things. And there was so many items there that we couldn't get to it to check it out. So if you're able to talk to that person and give them an idea of what is needed to happen to make it more accessible, like we talked earlier about attic access. Pulling clothes out of that closet that most of the time your attic access is in a closet. You can have them pull those clothes out so that I'm not getting insulation all over their clothes by trying to climb over and up into the attic space. Little things like that help me and make the inspection go faster, and helps the tenant that you're about to be, in a partnership with, basically.
Sure.
That, we're not messing up their stuff by going in there.
Great point. Yeah, that's fantastic. Setting those expectations up front through an assistant like Isaiah or something, and just getting it set up for the best possible result is so critical to make sure that you have access and you can get a good, strong report back to the investor or buyer, whatever it may be, is critical. But we're nearing about 25 minutes for this. If there's no other questions from any of you guys, I want to just thank you, Chris, for joining us today. Very educational.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll have you back again in the future to dive into maybe some more specific things. But for a general overview and a first-time interview, thank you for doing this. You did a great job.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Chris.
Hope to see you.